The stench of the sickroom hung heavy in the air, thick with the reek of decay and the sour tang of despair. In the dim, candle-lit chamber, a friar knelt by the bedside of a dying nobleman, his voice low and soothing as he murmured the final rite. But beneath the holy words, a darker purpose seethed. The friar's eyes darted around the room, lingering on the wealthy trappings that adorned the walls' rich tapestries, gleaming chalices, and the heavy gold crucifix that hung above the bed. As he whispered the absolution, his mind was already calculating the price of the nobleman's soul, the alms that would be his for the taking. This was the world of late medieval England, a time when the friars, with their vows of poverty and their mission to heal and confess, had become both the saviors and the scourges of the people. They moved freely through the households of the rich and the poor, their presence welcomed and their services sought after. But with their access came suspicion and envy, for the friars were not just spiritual guides. They were also men of flesh and blood, and some were all too willing to exploit their position for personal gain. In the eyes of their critics, the friars' mission to confess and heal was a facade. The sins they claimed to purify in their penitence were often a pretext for their own greed and sexual opportunism. The wealthy, in particular, were targets for the friars' flattery and manipulation, their confessions a means to extract money and favors. Even the poor, who had little to give, were not safe from the friars' prying eyes and wandering hands. The tension between the friars' lofty ideals and their often sordid reality was a recurring theme in the literature and songs of the time. Poets and preachers alike took aim at the hypocrisy of the mendicant orders, their lavish churches, and their cozy relationships with the powerful. The contrast between the humble, poverty-stricken image the friars purported to embody and the wealth and influence they actually wielded was a source of deep resentment among both the clergy and the laity. One of the most scathing critiques of the friars came from a work known as Jack Upland, a poem that targeted the mendicant orders with biting satire and harsh accusations. The poem's narrator, Jack Upland, posed a series of pointed questions to the friars, challenging their authority and their conduct. He asked how they could absolve lords and ladies of their sins like oppressing their tenants and living in lechery and gluttony, without being complicit in those very same sins. The friars' responses, as recorded in Friar Dawes' reply, did little to quell the growing suspicion and hostility. William Langland, the author of the allegorical poem Piers Plowman, delved deeply into the complexities of the friars' role in society. Langland's poem portrayed the friars both as patients and as healers, exploring the paradox of their spiritual sickness and their inability to heal themselves. In the poem, a friar named Flatterer is depicted as a false healer, a man who betrays the unity and safety of the church with his lies and manipulations. Langland's portrayal suggests that if the friars could be freed from the need to profit from their penitence, their healing mission might be redeemed. The physical and spiritual ailments of the friars in Piers Plowman are described in vivid detail, drawing on the medical knowledge of the time. Langland's use of medical terminology to describe the friars' sins and their consequences underscores the deep connection between the body and the soul, and the ways in which spiritual maladies can manifest as physical suffering. The friar's inability to confess his own sins is a central theme, highlighting the hypocrisy that lay at the heart of their mission. The friars' access to the innermost spaces of the household, both physical and spiritual, was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed them to bring comfort and healing to those in need, but it also opened the door to abuse and exploitation. The nobleman's dying chamber, the humble cottager's hearth, and the bustling streets of the town all bore witness to the friars' presence, and the mixed legacy they left behind. As the friars moved through the world, their actions and their failings were closely watched. The tension between their vocation and their reality continued to fuel the debates and the criticisms that shaped the late medieval landscape. The friars' power to absolve and to heal was a double-edged sword, and the question of whether they were truly servants of God or opportunists in holy guise remained a contentious one. The abrupt closure of the friars' houses in England in 1537 to 1538 marked the end of a 3-century chapter where friars and their institutions were deeply embedded in the civic life of the country. The dissolution led to the dispersal of friars, the seizure of their possessions, and the repurposing or destruction of their buildings. Libraries and records were scattered, and only a few books remained to testify to their former ownership. Despite this catastrophic disruption, the medicine of the friars did not entirely disappear. Instead, it found new life and continued to influence medical practices in the following centuries. Some medical manuscripts compiled by friars survived and found new users. These texts, such as those by Roger Bacon and Henry Daniel, were valued not as historical relics, but for their practical applications. The advent of print technology helped preserve and disseminate these works, making them accessible to a broader audience. For instance, Thomas Moulton's This is the Mirror or Glass of Health and Bartholomeus Anglicus's On the Properties of Things were republished and widely read. Print allowed these texts to reach readers who would never have had access to the original manuscripts. One notable example of the enduring influence of friars' medicine is seen through Simon Forman, an Elizabethan astrologer and healer. In 1574, Forman purchased a manuscript of the Tabula Medicine from Oxford. He integrated the remedies from this text into his own medical practice, unaware of its friar origins. Forman's personal charisma and detailed casebooks, which documented his treatments, influenced another prominent healer, the Anglican priest Richard Napier. Together, Forman and Napier treated and documented thousands of cases in late 16th and early 17th century England. Their methods, which included astrology, alchemy, and medical experiments, often echoed the practices of the friars. Before the Reformation, the influence of friars' medicine was already spreading. In the 15th century, there was a notable exchange of medical knowledge between the friars and university-trained physicians. The Franciscans, for example, began to record the cures of well-known secular physicians in their Tabula Medicine. This compilation included remedies from both friars and university-trained doctors, reflecting a growing collaboration between the two groups. One early manuscript of the Tabula Medicine, housed in Jesus College, Cambridge, contains many additional remedies added in the margins. These additions, often attributed to prominent physicians like Thomas Duncan and Gilbert Keimer, show that the friars were actively integrating the knowledge of university-trained doctors. For instance, Duncan, a physician to the Earl of March, is credited with a variant of the Pulvis Walteri, a well-known laxative. Gilbert Keimer, who served as the physician to Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, contributed remedies for pestilence and paralysis. These additions suggest that the Tabula Medicine was a living document, constantly evolving with new medical insights. Conversely, university-trained physicians also showed interest in the Tabula Medicine. Roger Marchal, a wealthy London physician, copied entries from the Tabula Medicine into his personal notes. Another manuscript, owned by the Oxford physician John Cockes, includes remedies attributed to him, indicating that he used the Tabula Medicine as a reference. Later, this manuscript was acquired by Simon Forman, further extending its influence. One of the most significant examples of the Tabula Medicine influencing medical practice is John Argentine, a royal physician in the late 15th century. Argentine, who studied at King's College, Cambridge, and later in Ferrara, Italy, copied extracts from the Tabula Medicine into his personal notebook. He included remedies from the friars, such as a recipe for distilling human blood to treat wounds, alongside his own and other sources. Argentine's notebook became a practical resource for his medical practice, and he may have used these remedies to treat Prince Arthur, the eldest son of Henry VII. At a more local level, the West Country healer Thomas Fairford also drew on the Tabula Medicine. Fairford kept a medical commonplace book, organized under medical and surgical headings. He explicitly referenced the Tabula Medicine and attributed some of his remedies to Franciscan sources. Fairford's collection of experimenta and charms, gathered from various sources, reflects the practical and eclectic nature of medical practice in the period. Through these examples, it is clear that the medicine of the friars continued to influence medical practices even after the dissolution of their houses. The survival of texts, the spread of knowledge, and the practical application of remedies ensured that the legacy of friars' medicine endured well into the post-mendicant era. Henry Daniel's works, the Liber Uricraciarum and the Herbal, have had a complex and evolving history. Both texts were modified and adapted by the author himself, leading to different versions and combinations. The Liber Uricraciarum exists in alpha and beta versions, and even manuscripts with a mix of both. The Herbal is found in two different organizational styles, but there was no standard version set by Daniel. When these works began circulating in the 15th century, the Liber Uricraciarum started appearing in medical miscellanies as short excerpts. The longer versions were enhanced with additional material in Latin and English, including astrological calendars, texts on doctor-patient interactions, herbal terms, bloodletting, and plague treatments. The aim was to make the text more useful as a practical guide to medicine. In the British Library's Egerton 1624 manuscript, a detailed index was added to enhance its usefulness. The adaptations continued into the 16th century. In the British Library's Sloane 1721 manuscript, a scribe added material on urine colors, abridged parts of the text, and modernized the language. Abridging Daniel's lengthy text became a common practice. One of the earliest abridgments is a 17-chapter version, about a tenth of the Alpha version, which survives in 3 complete copies. A notable adaptation is the Book of Narborough, an English version from 1442, which includes a 4th book called the Passionary, a practical guide to medical treatments from head to toe. The most widely read version of the Liber Uricraciarum is the printed Judgment of Urines from 1527, which is more focused on uroscopy and uses updated language. Daniel's Herbal includes a popular treatise on rosemary, which became an independent text in its own right. The treatise claims to have been written by the school of Salerno and sent to the Duchess of Hainault, who then sent it to her daughter, Queen Philippa of England. This claim, whether true or not, helped promote the text. The treatise on rosemary was widely read and used, as evidenced by the frequent appearance of rosemary recipes in 15th century remedy books. Despite its popularity, Daniel's version of the treatise did not make it into print, possibly because a simpler and shorter version began to circulate and eventually eclipsed Daniel's. Many of Daniel's manuscripts show signs of annotation by their owners. For example, the Cambridge University Library's MSGG 3.29 was owned by 2 16th century apothecaries who lived on the bridge at Bristol. The Gloucester Cathedral MS-19 was owned by a father and son, both named Henry Fowler, with the father leaving extensive annotations. Other owners were doctors, such as Fileman Holland, who annotated his copy and compared it with other works. Holland's annotations show practical applications, such as a comment on a urine test to determine infertility. The Herbal also attracted annotations. The British Library's additional MS 27329 features many 15th century Latin recipes and extensive annotations by the 17th century dramatist and manuscript collector James Cobbs. From Henry Daniel's time onwards, friars began to write medical texts in the vernacular to help lay people. Daniel's Liber Uricraciarum was written in English to be useful to non-medical readers. This aligns with the friars' mission to encourage lay people to develop their own health and spiritual well-being. For example, the 15th century medical writings in Biel, MS Sloane 3489, compiled by the Dominican Thomas Moulton, were written in English and aimed at a lay audience. Moulton's work included a translation of a popular plague treatise, which he simplified and organized into 3 parts: causes of the plague, prevention, and remedies. Moulton's version became very popular and was included in the 16th century bestseller, This is the Mirror or Glass of Health. Roger Bacon's writings also saw renewed interest in the 15th and 16th centuries. English alchemists like Giles Duez and Robert Greene collected and transcribed Bacon's works, assuming that all the texts attributed to him were genuine. They believed Bacon was the earliest figure in the English alchemical tradition. Greene's manuscripts contain many alchemical texts ascribed to Bacon, though only one is securely attributed to the 13th century friar. This interest in Bacon reflects the belief that he was a versatile scholar covering a wide range of sciences, from mathematics to alchemy. In the mid-1550s, John Dee, a scholar and advisor to royalty, began to build his famous library in Mortlake. Dee was deeply influenced by the works of Roger Bacon, a 13th century philosopher who had rejected the rigid scholasticism of his time. Dee's first major work, the Propigemmata Aphoristica of 1558, expanded on Bacon's theories of celestial influences on human affairs, using mathematics to ground astrology. Dee had also written a defense of Bacon's reputation, Speculum Unitatis, Sive Apologia pro Frater Rogerio Bacon Anglo, the Mirror of Unity, or Apology for the English friar Roger Bacon, in 1557, though this text is now lost. In it, Dee distinguished between magic, which involved demonic aid and was condemned by Bacon, and the legitimate use of nature's secrets to perform marvels. Dee's library, which he opened to visitors, contained a vast collection of Roger Bacon's works, including many manuscripts written in Dee's own hand. He annotated a manuscript of Bacon's, Epistola de Secretis Operibus Artis et Naturae, et de Nullitate Magii, which emphasized the distinction between magic and legitimate scientific inquiry. Dee was particularly interested in Bacon's ideas about experimental science, which he outlined in his mathematical preface to Euclid's Elements in 1570. Bacon's experimental science was characterized by three key aspects. It verified conclusions through experience, provided methods to teach truths that other sciences could not, and enabled the prediction of past, present, and future events, as well as the creation of remarkable works. Dee's interest in alchemy grew later, and by the time he settled in Mortlake, he had accumulated around 60 alchemical manuscripts and all the printed alchemical collections from the 1560s onwards. He annotated many of these, including a manuscript containing works by Albertus Magnus, Maurianus, Avicenna, and Rhases, as well as pseudo-Baconian texts. Roger Bacon's reputation in the 16th and 17th centuries was complex. While he was often portrayed as a necromancer, as seen in Robert Greene's play Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay, this was only part of the story. John Bale, a Carmelite friar and bibliographer, initially described Bacon as a necromancer in 1548, but later corrected himself, acknowledging Bacon's profound skills in mathematics. Bacon's reputation was also shaped by anti-papal sentiments, with stories of his arrest and the suppression of his ideas by the Franciscans. Despite this, Bacon's ideas continued to influence scholars like John Dee and Kenelm Digby, who planned to publish a complete edition of Bacon's works in 1637. In 1574, Simon Forman, an astrologer and healer, bought a manuscript of the Tabula Medicine in Oxford. He adapted this manuscript, now held at Cambridge King's College, by adding extensive annotations and new content. Forman assumed the Tabula Medicine was written by John Cockes, an Oxford physician, but it was actually compiled by friars. Forman's editions included extracts from Andrew Board's Breviary of Health, as well as his own remedies, case notes, and astrological guidance. He drew a zodiac man and recorded medical treatments, such as bloodletting. The College of Physicians in London, however, scorned Forman's methods and fined him £10, confining him to prison for a few days in 1595. Forman's practice was heavily based on astrology, and he kept detailed casebooks that included astrological charts for his patients. His student, Richard Napier, continued this practice and created his own casebooks, which were later inherited by his nephew, Sir Richard Napier. These casebooks, now in the Bodleian Library, contain over 80,000 recorded cases, most of which were medical. The treatments included herbal, animal, and mineral remedies, as well as alchemical and astrological methods. The De Proprietatibus Rerum, by Bartholomeus Anglicus, a 13th century Franciscan, was another important text that influenced medical and natural knowledge in England. John Trevisa translated this encyclopedia into Middle English in 1398, preserving much of the Latin terminology. Trevisa's translation was initially circulated among nobles and gentry, but the De Proprietatibus Rerum remained popular in both Latin and English throughout the 15th and 16th centuries. It provided practical information on natural history, the human body, and medicine, and was a valuable resource for householders and educated readers. The dissolution of the monasteries and the dispersal of the friars in the 16th century did not spell the end for the medical knowledge they had cultivated. Instead, this knowledge found new life by blending into other medical practices and losing its ties to the discredited, popish friars in Protestant England. Before the Reformation, many elements of friars' medicine had already been adopted by university physicians and other practitioners. For instance, the notebooks of Thomas Fairford and John Argentine contained a mix of friars' remedies, and those from other famous physicians. The Tabula Medicine, a key medical text, was not easily recognized as a friar's work, especially after it was filled with additional remedies from well-known doctors like Gilbert Keimer, Thomas Duncan, and William Hadacliffe. This made it a valuable resource for 16th and 17th century medical practitioners who had no reason to care about its origins. One example is Henry Dyneley, a medical practitioner from Worcestershire, who compiled a handbook in the early 17th century. He included a remedy called sanativum puncturdum, originally from the Tabula medicine, without mentioning its friar originator, William Home. Similarly, those who annotated the works of Henry Daniel, a Dominican friar, showed no interest in his religious background, focusing instead on the practical value of his medical knowledge. Publishers and printers of the 16th century further obscured the friars' contributions by attributing works to contemporary authors. For instance, This is the Mirror or Glass of Health, originally compiled by a 15th century Dominican Thomas Malton, was presented as the work of a 16th century author with no religious ties. This allowed the reading public to assume it was a fresh modern text. The Great English Encyclopedia on the Properties of Things, originally compiled by the Franciscan Bartholomeus Anglicus, underwent several reeditions and translations. Thomas Bertholet and Stephen Batman reworked the text, attributing it to a certain Bartholomew Glanville, a noble Suffolk family member rather than the friar. This rebranding allowed the book to reach a wider audience through print, with multiple editions and hundreds of copies distributed. The casebooks of Simon Forman, a renowned 16th century practitioner, illustrate how the medicine of the friars continued to thrive among those outside the official medical establishment. Forman, who constructed his medical vade-mecum around a copy of the Tabula medicine, believed it was based on the work of a learned physician named John Cockes. He was confident enough to claim he was as well grounded in medicine as the censors of the College of Physicians. Forman's work combined traditional friars' medicine with his interests in astrology, alchemy, and magic, which aligned more closely with the friars' own explorations into the special sciences inspired by Roger Bacon. In this way, the medical knowledge of the friars persisted and evolved, adapting to new contexts and finding new audiences. The friars' legacy, though often hidden, continued to shape the medical landscape of early modern England.